What I'm going to do is give you a little bit of background. I'm going to talk a little bit about what a science of cybersecurity might look like. And the reason I picked this topic was because I'm the principal investigator on one of the projects, which is part of a new GCHQ EPSRC centre, which is looking at the science of cybersecurity. So this is one of the new research institutes, which this particular one was created in October last year. And then I'll have a few concluding remarks before we move to the Q&A. So first of all, a little bit of background about ISST, as we call it, the Institute for Security Science and Technology. So Imperial really only has 4 of these institutes, and just so that you don't run away with the idea that I'm the director of some large organisation, I should tell you that the Institute is closed for business because I'm here tonight. So basically, it's, it's a relatively virtual organisation, but its ambition is to harness science and technology and apply it to problems in national security and resilience. And to harness that science and technology primarily from the departments at Imperial, but also we seek to play a role in bringing together science and technology from across the UK where appropriate. And our general approach to this is that security is a multidisciplinary problem, whether it's cybersecurity or other forms of security. And the role of the Institute is not to compete with departments, but it's actually to take the very low TRL work that's going on in departments and try to translate it to something that's a bit closer to what government or industry might recognise as a solution to their problems. So we work in partnership both with companies, with government and with other universities. And we, like City, I believe, exploit the fact that we're situated in the capital and therefore have good access to the various government agencies who share an interest in some of these problems. So we aim to provide a trusted interface to those agencies. And our focus areas really have been pretty constant for the last 3.5 years, which predate the National Security Strategy, but actually really relate to the top Tier 1 threats that were identified in the National Security Strategy. So the 4 areas, of course, tonight we're going to focus on security in cyberspace, or cybersecurity. We also have an interest in critical infrastructure protection and security in crowded places. A lot of people are saying that the next big thing after cyber is going to be CBRN threat reduction, and we certainly have expertise at Imperial in that area. And then a much less developed area for us is bio and environmental security. So that's really the Institute. Now, cybersecurity is many things to many people. So I thought I'd start maybe with just reminding you that since 2011, the end of 2011, the UK has had a national cybersecurity programme. In fact, of course, we did have a security strategy before that. The Labour government in 2009 published a cybersecurity strategy which formed the basis for the creation of the Office of Cybersecurity in the Cabinet Office. But the coalition government in 2011 published a much more detailed strategy, which really had the 4 pillars on the left-hand side. So basically an ambition to improve the national cybersecurity operational architecture, improving cyber defence, particularly for critical infrastructure, combating cyber crime. And the area which everyone interpreted as being most relevant to universities was about capacity building, enhancing education and skills. The cybersecurity strategy actually basically was preceded by a national security strategy which already announced that £650 million would be spent in the UK over the current comprehensive spending review period to actually address some of these issues on the left-hand side of this slide. And the vast bulk of that £650 million, quite rightly, went into the single intelligence account. another 14% of it into the MOD to really improve the national defences against cyber attack. A naive reading of this would be that 2% of that pie chart is going into the business innovation and skills, which has responsibility for university funding. So there's about 13 million in this pot for university research. The situation is actually much better than that, as I'll describe a little later. So what is cybersecurity? Well, as I said, cybersecurity is many things to many people. One possible way of approaching a definition of what I mean by cybersecurity might be to look at some of the calls that have come out of the research councils to fertilise some cybersecurity work in universities. And GCHQ, together with EPSRC, have now run 2 exercises to recognise academic centres of excellence in cybersecurity. And they define cybersecurity from that academic sort of research point of view as covering these 8 areas that I've listed on this slide. And I guess looking at those areas, it's maybe pretty apparent what some of them will include. Maybe as we go down towards the bottom, it becomes less apparent for some of the bullets on this slide. The research into security technologies and products, for example, is where GCHQ define a lot of the cloud research and so on to be going on, cloud security and also database security and things like that. And this science of cybersecurity area is an area which has also featured quite strongly in American cybersecurity strategies and research calls. And it's really about, it includes a number of things, and I'll get more specific about what it includes from the point of view of our research institute in a little while. But from the point of view of the call for academic centres of excellence, it includes things like the economics of security, but also quantitative approaches to security, so building techniques which would allow you to measure, for example, how secure a system is. So getting an understanding of those kinds of issues is what, in the context of this call, was seen as fitting into the science of cybersecurity. On a more practical level, GCHQ, through its CESG operation, have published fairly recently, within the last 12 months, 10 steps as advice for institutions, both companies and other public institutions, 10 steps that people should be considering to improve their cyber security. They observe that actually this block, which goes right the way across, called information risk management, about having the right kind of governance and understanding of what the risks are within an institution, gets you 80% of the way to actually stopping cyber attacks, but they also identify these other 9 components. Whilst this may not be completely future-proof, there's lots of things in that jigsaw that you can see, which hopefully you can read from the back there, which would be things you would expect to see GCHQ advising companies and educational establishments and so on to take seriously. So there's something about mobile working and home working. There's a lot about network security, malware protection, and monitoring of systems. So I mentioned a little while ago I spoke about the pie chart, which showed about 13 million potentially going through BIS. GCHQ and the MOD have been spending quite a lot of the money allocated to their pot to support longer-term research. So to date, there's been about £25 million worth of calls for various activities. There are now 11 academic centres of excellence for cybersecurity research, and I'm pleased to say that our institute at Imperial is one of those. And the case that we put in for recognition as an academic centre of excellence was very much about the engineering of secure software systems. Others will have focused on different aspects of the landscape, which I outlined a couple of slides ago. There's been a couple of research institutes announced now. There's a research institute in the science of cybersecurity, which I'm going to say a lot more about in the rest of the talk, which was roughly a £4 million activity. There's a new research institute in program analysis and verification, which is another £4.5 million, which has been announced within the last 2 to 3 weeks, and which will be hosted at Imperial in the Department of Computing. And then there's been a couple of other activities. There's been one called Ceres, which was about bringing social sciences and computing together to explore various aspects of cybersecurity. There's a new initiative which is open at the moment, which closes in a couple of weeks' time, which is about business-academic collaborations in cybersecurity, focusing on some of the underpinning science that might be brought to bear to address some of the key challenges that business face at the moment. There's going to be an announcement within the next 2 weeks at Portcullis House of 2 new centres for doctoral training in cybersecurity, and the intention is that those will each train roughly through public funding about 8 PhD students a year for the next 3 years, starting from this October. So the intention of a centre for doctoral training is to build a cohort. So the cohort that these centres will be building will be in the stable state, roughly 20 to 25 PhD students at any particular time. And these students will typically be doing 4-year programs, and a lot of them will involve some industrial training component. So those 2 will be announced, I think, on the 18th of April, in fact, by Francis Maud at Portcullis House. And then very recently, the FCO has also announced and actually funded a capacity building initiative, which is trying to spread best practice both from the UK but also inter-country across the world at a few key target countries who are main traders with the UK. So basically, since cybersecurity is an international problem, I think there's been a proper recognition that whilst we might make our own systems secure, given that we trade with many countries who have different standards to us, it's important that we disseminate best practice and try to bring as many of them as we can up to the same kinds of levels as the UK enjoys. So that's actually going to be led from the University of Oxford. Sadie Creese is going to lead that initiative over the next 2 years, actually starting, as I understand it, on the 1st of April. So it's already started and it has 2 years of funding. It's not actually a £2 million initiative. The whole initiative is £2 million. The university-led capacity building activity is about £500,000 per year over the next 2 years. So it's a £1 million initiative. So what about the science of cybersecurity? So this is the first slide from the Research Institute provided to me by the director of the Research Institute, who's a lady who I'm sure many of you know, Angela Sass from University College. But it's something that we all in the Research Institute buy into, which is that security is a process, not a product, and that therefore it involves people, processes, and technology. As a computer scientist, my focus may be on the technology, but the Research Institute brings together a very multidisciplinary community of people working on cybersecurity issues, as we'll see as I proceed. The intention is to move from an empirical, dare I say, sort of ad hoc approach to security to a more evidence-based approach to establishing security for systems. Although, as the Research Institute was set up, it doesn't have industry involvement from day one. We do have an industry-led advisory board for the Research Institute, and it's certainly the intention that the researchers working in the universities will produce early results which can be deployed in industry. So the intention is to get industry involved as early on as possible, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the ways we're doing that a little later. So basically, this is all about avoiding the notion that that sometimes prevails with normal research council funding, which is that once you've won the funding, you've then got 3 to 3.5 years to spend in your ivory tower, so to speak, doing something which roughly corresponds to what you might have said you were going to do at the outset. Sorry, that's a bit cynical, but that is often the experience with particularly more theoretically oriented research projects. So now there's an alternative approach to what cybersecurity is all about, and very recently Fred Schneider, who's quite a big name in this area, has published a paper called A Blueprint for Science of Cybersecurity in this journal called The Next Wave. This came out at the end of last year. And his aspiration is to build systems whose security follows from first principles. And basically his interpretation of a science is really very much along the Aristotelian tradition that basically a science is really a collection of laws which you validate using experimental techniques, and then if your laws are any good, they'll help you to predict the outcomes of experiments in the future. And there's some kind of iterative development of those laws through some kind of Kuhnian synthesis and antithesis process. And he as so often happens when one talks about cybersecurity, biological analogies come into play. His particular choice is health system. So the health of individuals, good health, is never going to be a solved problem, and he quite rightly, I think, says that cybersecurity won't be either. And the problem is that attacks co-evolve with defences. Over the drinks before we came down here, we were discussing this a little bit, and it's a very asymmetric system. So maybe it's much better to be a hacker than it is to be a systems administrator trying to defend your systems. So I think one or two people are going away from here to think through that after the event. So some attacks will be best addressed by reactive systems, others not maybe. But Schneider's position is that if we're going to develop good defences, we need to develop good laws. And laws are things which will relate classes of attacks with classes of defences and classes of policies. And as far as classes of attacks are concerned, he makes the point that in fact the only way of really attacking a system is through its interface. And of course systems have many different sort of interfaces, and I think probably the third thing in that list is maybe, again, from discussions that we had before this talk, but also discussions I've had in many other places, it's the people component that may be the most serious source of vulnerabilities to systems, so the so-called insider attack, or people just being stupid. And I'll come back to that when I talk about one of the projects in the Research Institute. In terms of policies, CIA is something that often gets bandied around as the kind of policy framework for thinking about security. CIA standing, in this case, for confidentiality, which is about who can access your systems, integrity, which is about what can be accessed and what can be done to it, and availability, which I think is fairly obvious. Schneider makes the point, which I think is really, again, well made, but also motivated by his particular sledgehammer that he has to bring to bear on these things. He makes the point that confidentiality, integrity, and availability are rather difficult to formalize, and therefore it's difficult to build a good law system based around that kind of approach to security. And he prefers trace-based systems and safety and liveness properties, which are familiar to people who work in safety-critical systems. So safety properties are properties which guarantee that a system never does anything bad, and liveness properties which effectively guarantee that a system eventually does something good. So a lot of the formal methods community who have looked at systems verification, one of the big areas that people have studied is safety-critical systems, and one sees quite a volume of work on these trace-based properties which divide into safety versus liveness properties. So And then classes of defense may be static. They may be trying to make sure that systems are completely robust before they're deployed, which is what I guess I really mean by static, or they might be dynamic. And examples of static defenses would be good program analysis associated with rewriting techniques to actually somehow evolve the system if it has security flaws, so that those security flaws are no longer there. Or they may be dynamic. So dynamic defenses might be as simple as actually isolating your systems, either physically isolating them or having virtually isolated subsystems, virtual machines and processes. Then there's reference monitoring, which is a technique that Schneider maybe has made much of his reputation on, or obfuscation techniques, which are about crypto techniques, data encryption and so on, to actually foil potential attackers from understanding what the systems are trying to achieve. And then he offers a number of example laws, one of which is that reference monitors are actually about enforcing trace properties which can be characterized by this safety notion that eventually that nothing bad ever happens. So that's someone else's take on the science of cybersecurity. Now let me talk a little bit about the Research Institute in Science of Cybersecurity. I'll give you a brief overview of the whole thing and then spend the final moments of my presentation talking in a bit more detail about our particular component of it. So, as I think I mentioned when I first spoke about the Institute, it's funded by GCHQ in partnership with EPSRC, but subsequently badged under the Research Council's UK Global Uncertainties Programme. It's £3.8 million over 3.5 years, and it's a virtual institute which effectively consists of 4 projects involving 7 different universities, coordinated through University College, which is why the University College logo is appearing on this slide, with the research director, Angela Sass. The idea is that it brings together a group of academics across a variety of disciplines to work together to basically address this multidisciplinary challenge of developing a science of cybersecurity. More specifically, GCHQ were concerned that this research institute would address 2 issues, 2 aspects of the science of cybersecurity, one of which has to do with the measurement issue that I mentioned earlier on. So this is answering the question, how secure is my organization, whatever that might mean. And the second is about supporting decision-making by systems administrators. So how do we make better security decisions? And basically, all of the projects involve some theoretical work, be it theory from the point of view of social sciences or theory from the point of view of computer science, and empirical work. So hopefully the theory will be grounded in some kind of empirical experience. And I think I've talked about the shift from a sort of more ad hoc based approach to security to evidence-based security, which is the final bullet point on that slide. We will actually be working with people in the Department of Homeland Security funded through their cybersecurity program in the US. There will be exchange of internships between the US and the UK and also doctoral students. There will be an international conference on the science of cybersecurity, which will be hosted at University College at the end of this year, and there'll be a high-quality open access journal produced, started again with Angela Sass as the editor-in-chief. So the 4 projects are distributed fairly across the UK, 3 of them in the London area, Royal Holloway, Imperial with Queen Mary and Royal Holloway as partners, University College, which actually has the University of Aberdeen as a partner, and then Newcastle University and the University of Northumbria as the 4th project. So the Royal Holloway project is led by Lizzie Coles-Kemp, and it's called SciSeca. And basically it's a fairly empirically based project using techniques from social sciences to explore how security managers develop, maintain, and use visibility of social and technical asset compliance for management of cybersecurity. So what this will aim to do in the end is to design visualization tools which extend the manager's ability to manage their systems. So the particular research questions that they'll be addressing are about the security manager knowing how to combine and when to combine specific controls, how the security manager can assess whether those combinations are effective or not, understand what makes them effective, and then these visualization tools that will come out at the end will support the security manager in that decision-making process. So the expected outputs from this are various methods and also some fairly substantial use cases and case study reports. So Lizzie is a working sociologist who does a lot of field work, particularly actually in Sunderland and the North East. And a lot of the use cases and case studies will be about local government activities in the Sunderland area. Then the University of Northumberland and Newcastle are working on a choice architecture for information security, and basically they're focusing primarily on the bring your own device sort of revolution that we were seeing 12 months ago and maybe a bit passé now, but essentially it's about decision support systems to help systems administrators deal with the uncertainty that arises from opening up systems to allow users to bring along their own devices. And then the University College project is called Productive Security, and this is with the University of Aberdeen. And this is about helping decision makers make better decisions which about organizational security which don't affect productivity. So these are some of the sort of quotes that either Angela has produced herself or she's picked up through interaction with people in companies and so on. And basically maybe this kind of message here is one of the most important. We've seen a lot of use of captures, and people have now studied the use of those, and the estimate is that 17 years of human effort are wasted every day in terms of dealing with captures. So basically, one could argue, therefore, that whole approach is really broken, and we need to think about more productive ways of using people's time. So this slide, I think, is really just about some of the obstacles and workarounds that people have. And the thing I really like about this slide is the picture on the left-hand side, which, in case you can't see it, is a barrier which for some reason was placed in the middle of a road with open green space either side of it. And the frosty weather has shown how people have actually treated that barrier, and that's a good analogue for many deployed security systems in companies at the moment. So they're looking at three companies, actually. They're looking at a large multinational energy company. They're also then looking at a bank, and then actually not a company, but looking at some government-based activity. And they do a series of semi-structured interviews and surveys. And what they want to do is find ways of encouraging staff to be a bit more open about workarounds so that the company can employ better security management techniques which don't involve wasting time of employees to actually get around onerous security, which as we saw a couple of slides ago, may not be as effective as the company would like it to be. Which brings me on to the final 5 to 10 minutes of my talk, which is really about games and abstraction for cybersecurity, which is my project. I'm the PI on this project. I have a partner in the business school at Imperial called Tom Hearn. I have colleagues from Royal Holloway Department of Mathematics, Dushko Pavlovich, and a colleague from Queen Mary, Pasquale Malacaria. So the proposition we start with is that there's probably been something like 10 years of work looking at how game theory might help systems administrators make better decisions to defend their systems. So in a very simple setting, but in fact our ambition is to look at much more complicated settings, but in a very simple setting, you might consider that you have a two-player game where one player is the attacker, that might represent a coalition of attackers, of course, and the other player is the system administrator, who we might consider to be the defender. So we were talking again before the talk about payoffs, and it's pretty clear what the payoffs in a game theoretic setting for the defender might be, and that's to do with minimizing the downtime and the cost of replacing resources which have been lost through cyber attack. What's much less clear, and I think will be an aspect of this project as it becomes more mature, is understanding properly what the payoffs for attackers should be. And of course, it will depend very much what the attacker is. If the attacker is a script kiddie, as a phrase I learned from David before the talk, then their payoff might be fairly small. But if they're acting as a proxy for serious organized crime or a state, then organised crime and state might have rather different payoffs. And the kind of game theoretic model that we're looking at is a model which uses some kind of probabilistic game, so maybe a stochastic game or a Bayesian game, because the kinds of attacks that we're interested in modelling in this situation are multi-step attacks. So for example, if an attacker has managed to compromise an HTTP server, then they may have various options that they could then go on to do. If they're anonymous, they might want to go on and deface the website. If they're an organised crime agency, they might want to install a sniffer so that they can steal information about passwords and other data as the system is used. So as a systems administrator, I might have various strategies that I could employ to actually mitigate against this attack. If I've seen that the HTTP server has been compromised, then I might actually then just choose to reinstall the compromised account. Or I might install a sniffing detector to wait to see what the attacker is going to do next and try to catch the attacker in the act. So if I'm anonymous and I've compromised an HTTP server, I might just deface the website. That means that I can get out of the attack fairly quickly, and my chances of being caught in the act are much less than if I leave something in the system and wait to see how the attack develops. So these kinds of thoughts can be formalized in the context of game theory by associating correct payoffs with the attackers and the defenders, and then effectively solving the game theoretic model to find out what the equilibria are, and that will tell me something about, given some kind of initial conditions, it will tell me about my best strategies in terms of defending against various forms of attack. And as I say, this is something that's been done for quite a long time, about 10 years. People have been using stochastic game theory and various other forms of game theory. And if you look at the literature, there's quite a lot of literature, but there's a lot of similarity between various bits of the literature. And quite often we end up with relatively simple systems. This is one here that models the computer system of a university. And that's the whole model in some senses, in that it's got just 4 components, which is some kind of environment which represents the whole of the outside world, some kind of web server functionality, which is the W, some kind of file server functionality, which is the F, and then a collection maybe of thousands of networked workstations, which are all represented by the N node there. And then you've got links between each of those things. And of course, if that model is going to tell you anything, you have to put some structure on the nodes and on the links. So a classic paper in this area, which was co-authored by Jeanette Wing in about 2001, began to put some structure on those nodes. Fairly simple structure. Each node is represented by about 3 different components, and the links are represented by 2 or 3 components. But then if you start to put all of that together, you realize very quickly that you've got a very large state system. In fact, in that particular model, they ended up very quickly with over 4 billion states to consider. And at that time, that would have been intractable. So what they do is they say, well, actually of those 4 billion states, just about 18 of those states really are of any interest to me. So I'll ignore all the others, work with 18 states, work with a very limited set of possible attack scenarios, and then they end up with a tractable model. But it's completely ad hoc. And one of the key questions for us is then if you solve such a limited game model with only 18 states and very limited attack scenarios, you work out what the equilibria are, which is what you're using to actually give you advice on what decisions to take in terms of defending your system. How do those equilibria actually relate to the equilibria of the real system? And my particular sledgehammer that I've had for 30 years is called abstract interpretation. It allows me to have a rigorous mathematical technique to actually doing that state reduction. Very briefly, what abstract interpretation is, it started off as something which aimed to determine what the properties of a program would be at runtime without actually running the program. So the reason you might want to do that is to actually optimize the code that you produce from the program, for example. So a lot of the work in the 60s and 70s on optimizing compilers can be formalized through this approach called abstract interpretation. Abstract interpretation is a semantics-based technique, so effectively it builds a formal model of the program. And of course, if you build a proper model of the program, so this should ring bells with respect to the description of game theory I've just given you. If you build a proper model of the program, then it's probably going to be infinite, actually, not just 4 billion states. And all the interesting properties are going to be reducible to the halting problem. So they're all going to be undecidable. What abstract interpretation does is give you a mathematical framework such that you can actually build a much simpler model, which is precisely related to the full model. And then you can ask questions of that abstract model. And you can be guaranteed through the mathematical framework that we use that the answers you get are safe answers with respect to the original system. The problem, of course, is that you get some false positives, but that's a penalty that I'm afraid you have to pay to get decidability. The all close there is because, of course, games, I talked about stochastic game theory, so actually there's a quantitative dimension. So with quantitative, so safe in this context is a lattice theoretic concept. In the case of quantitative systems, closeness, according to, say, least squared approximation or something like that, is something that you might aim for rather than safety. So we intend to apply these ideas from abstract interpretation to game semantics. We will be looking at 3 different types of system, educational systems. In fact, today, tomorrow, and the next day, we're running a hackathon with student hackers at Imperial as part of the urban prototyping event. But there's also lots of data out there from other universities about their cyber security situation. We're also planning to work with a large bank that I can't announce at the moment, but I think we have the green light from them. And we intend to work with some part of the public sector towards the end of the project. Of course, I presented a very simplified picture of what goes on in real life games. The games we construct will be games of at least imperfect information. The system administrator won't know what state the attacker's in. So there are fairly well-defined techniques within the game theoretic literature for cybersecurity as to how to deal with that. More interestingly, maybe, the games are incomplete in that we don't just not know what state the attacker might be in, we also don't know what strategy it's following. And that will be particularly true in the context of emergent new attacks. So we intend towards the second half of the project to use machine learning techniques to try to produce an adaptive game theory for supporting cyber decision making. So really, I've pretty well said what's on that slide in those terms. So this is my concluding slide, and I wasn't quite sure what to put on it. So it's really some motherhood and apple pie statements. I hope I've shown you that cybersecurity research is a very active area at the moment, and I'm sure that most of you didn't need to be told that, because looking around the room I recognise a few people who know that at least as well as I do, and probably better. Solutions certainly require international cooperation, and maybe should have said there, are also really requiring multidisciplinary activity. Real solutions aren't just going to come out of computer labs, they aren't just going to come out of social science experiments. We have to find ways of working together to understand each other, to produce good solutions. There is a desperate need for a scientific approach, and I sort of characterised that earlier on as really the development of a set of laws, maybe, which help us predict how systems will behave in future. And I think that might be particularly appropriate in the context of the imperfect game theory that I spoke about briefly a few moments ago. Because I do believe that game theory has an important role to play, and I think it will be a major contribution to the science of cybersecurity to answer some of these questions that I've sort of half posed this evening about the role of game theory in cybersecurity.